Okay, everybody, this is episode 7 of our series of on Jeremy Bentham's book, Not Paul, but Jesus. And there's a lot of you following it, so I'm hoping that you will find this another interesting episode. And what I'm finding out is that digging in like Bentham is doing shows you things that you would not otherwise think of, and that's really a lesson in what's the value of study. It's not just simply learning what somebody else thought. It's actually beginning to think things that you never thought of thinking about. So we'll see. He's going to see things I've never even thought to look at. So let's start right back into it. We're going to go into Not Paul, but Jesus, book of 1823, for those of you who are new here. And Jeremy Bentham is a famous philosopher and politician. He was a legal reformer, way ahead of his time. And he wrote this book, Not Paul, but Jesus, anonymously, because he was told by his friends that you'd face hell and more than hell if you put it in your own name. So he did it anonymously, but eventually came out that he was the author. And he spent 6 or 7 years on this, and he had people helping him. So this was a project of great interest to him, and he liked Jesus, but he didn't like Paul. And he talked about Christianity is a religion wounded, has this serious wound that it has to heal from Paul. So anyway, so let's go to page 9. So that's his purpose. He wants to elevate Jesus over Paul, and that's clearly from beginning to end. He seems to have a love for Jesus, um, and that's all. He's not a Christian in any kind of orthodox sense. He's not affiliated with any church. He simply loves Jesus, loves to read him, obviously, loves to follow him, whatever. But that's neither here nor there. Actually, he is a repository of ideas to look at, to examine, and they're just either yes, they're right or wrong. And but he's a brilliant man, so we're getting a great insight from somebody who's smarter than me, and things I wouldn't have thought of and didn't think of. So, all right. Anyway, let's look at what he's got here on page 9. He continues on comparing the three accounts of vision first. Okay, so the vision first is the meaning the first time that Paul encountered his Jesus, and that was on the road to Damascus. And then there's the Acts 22 true vision in his head, which while he's at the temple, he has an ecstasy. And I think there's one minor one while he gets trapped in some city. He says that Jesus spoke to him briefly and said, "You'll be okay in the city." Whatever. I have There are friends of ours who'll help you in the city when you get there, or something like that. Another strange thing, but anyway. So on comparing the three accounts of vision first, meaning that Damascus, the particulars will be found referable to 12 heads, and you'll see what he means by that. Under no more than 2 of the 12. So he means subject matters. So there's 12 subject matters. You can divide these 3 different accounts. So Paul has the same account is recounted once by Luke in Acts 9. 2 times it's Luke quoting Paul talking in Acts 22 the first time to a big crowd in a moment that he's just been arrested, and it's very off the cuff. He's going to tell the Damascus Road experience there. Then the third one is when he has this much longer period of time to prepare. He's been in prison for a while, and he's got to give his defense, and he's going to come out to King Agrippa and to I think it's Festus, and he's going to put on his defense. And Festus is just like mystified. I can't even figure out what is he on charge for. He's literally doesn't know why Paul's been arrested. So this is the era when people don't have court records; they can know what's going on. So Paul never tells him why he's been arrested, and he just says, "I'm appealing to Caesar," to that poor guy, and he's like, "Okay, I'm going to get you out of here." Anyway, so I thought that was just funny. So listen to this. He says, "Under no more than 2 of the 12 subject headings will the conformity, meaning agreement among them, be found entire." So if you compare these 12 things, the sunlight, something else, is there any of those that are in agreement with the other account? And what he's saying is that of those 12, 2 of the 12 are the only ones that are found consistent through all three accounts. So that's just something to bear in mind. There's something wrong, is what he's getting your curiosity. Is how can that be? How can three accounts in one book of the same event come out only twice? Was there of the 12 facts mentioned, only two of those 12 facts were consistently stated the same way in all three accounts, or consistently. So it's very strange. Okay, and I'm skipping a little bit ahead. He's going to be going over these events, the what he calls the omissions and the contradictions, and he's breaking them down separate from each other. And then he's making a point here that so historian Luke speaks of Paul giving that person's own account of the same occurrence. So in other words, in Acts 9, Luke gives a summary of what he had learned from Paul, but just talking, chatting, whatever they had been doing. And the second and third account, that's in Acts 22, is the second account, and the third account is Acts 26. It's the same event. Nobody doubts it's the same event. But Acts 22 is when it's all of a sudden he's put in the spotlight. His friend Trophimus has defiled the temple by going in uncircumcised past the middle wall. People are outraged. They're coming after Paul, saying, "Hey, you brought him in here. Why'd you do that?" Blah 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 blah. So he doesn't have a lot of time to plan out what he's going to say, and that's important. So then the third account is what is called the studied account. So you've got a studied account where Paul has been in prison for maybe a year or two at Festus's, and he's going to ask King Agrippa, "Can you help me figure out this case?" And King Agrippa agrees, and now Paul's going to be given notice to show up, and he can now present his case, and he tells the story of the Damascus Road. So this is something that you can say was a studied account. So you have the studied account is the Acts 26, which is the second account, which is directly from the mouth of Paul, according to Luke. And the non-studied account, the one that was given in sudden pressure, was the account in Acts 22 when it's at the temple and all the excitement happened. And then you have Luke's account, which should also be a very studied account too, because it was done in a way that is just simply interviewing Paul and getting the facts from him. So really, the first and the third account really should be the closest, you would think, right? Now, so let's go down here and we get closer to this. And I want to get to the first example at least, and then we'll go through these different things. On the occasion of that account, which is the first of the two of which the historian Luke represents, Paul is giving an account of this momentous occurrence. So he's talking about Acts 22. This justification for want of completeness, or this excuse for want of correctness, might naturally enough have place, for it was while pleading for his life at Jerusalem before a mixed multitude, no inconsiderable part of which were endeavoring at the destruction of his life, that Paul is represented as delivering this first of his two accounts. Call that the supposed unstudied or unpremeditated account. Okay, so we talked about that, and that's Acts 22. Not so on the occasion on which he represents as delivering the second of these two accounts. He means Acts 26 before King Agrippa. On this occasion, it is true he is represented as pleading in his defense, but it is a pleading in and before a regularly constituted judicatory and after time for preparation in much greater abundance than he could have wished. I think it means the long imprisonment that preceded it. Call this the supposed studied or premeditated account. And he's going to refer to it most often as the studied account. Let's just make that clear. In this view, the proper standard of comparison can not be dubious. The historian Luke being himself, in all three accounts, the immediately reporting witness, and having had his own time for the forming of them all, that which he gives in his own person. So he gives his own first person accounts of the second and third, and which therefore naturally occupies the first place, should in respect of both qualities as well as that of clearness have been, and setting aside deceptive design, naturally would have been as perfect as it was in his power to make it. Okay, so I think what he's saying is we have to trust that Luke's trying to endeavor to record these events in first person. He's there in both of these accounts, and he's we can trust that he's trying to make them as complete as possible. Then So he's going to tell us that there's 10 disconformities, meaning there's the inconsistencies or problems or credibility issues. 7, oh, yeah, 7, wait, okay, I'm going to take that back. 10 disconformities, of which 7 have a deficiency or what he calls an omission. 3 have a contradiction. Okay, so that's now I understand what he's saying. Okay. Um, okay, so let me show you what he's talking about. The deficiencies are what he calls omissions, and the others are called contradictions. So, I'm a little puzzled. Didn't he just say 7 and 3? You know what it is? He wrote that down and then he moved it. He moved some of the omissions into contradictions. That's funny, and he didn't edit it out. Can you see that? So he says 10 following instances of disconformity. 7 will be found to be cases of simple deficiencies or omissions. 3 contradictions. But when you get to the list, it's not. It's only 5 omissions, and now instead of 3 contradictions, there's 5. 5 more. So he actually didn't edit this, make a final edit to correct that number. So he's moved a couple of omissions into the contradiction category, but that shows you how he was analyzing too. He was starting with omissions and saying what explains that omission, and then if it graduated to the next level, he would move it into the contradiction category. So that's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to pause it here because I'm going to go through the first example he gives, the light scene, and show you how he does his analysis, and this will help us understand how to read some of these passages ourselves. And I'm going to show you how I broke down what he's saying. So I just want to show you here because we're going to switch screens. I mean, I could read this all to you, and then you'd have to kind of put it together. But I'm going to show you a method by which you can learn how to do something what I call, breaking it down and analyzing things. Sometimes I have to do this with a legal case. I have to list the parties, the legal causes of action, some of the facts, and so that's how lawyers, have to break down everything. We can't miss a certain every detail can be important in a decision you're reading or in your case that you're prosecuting or defending. So every little detail counts, and we have little. I don't want to call them. They're just little methods we use to analyze things, or at least I do. I think other lawyers do the same thing. So I'm going to show you how that works. So we'll switch to my other computer. Okay, so now I've taken this into my favorite program for word processing. I'll put a plug-in for Corel's WordPerfect, a superb program. It's not cheap though, but it's a very good and very powerful program. I've used it since the 1980s, and it's only gotten better in my mind. So here we have the same 10, the omissions and the contradictions. Okay. So now what I do is you can create a table very easily. I'm sure you can do this in Word, but there's many reasons why WordPerfect is exceptional. Okay. So he has, let's show you the structure he has. You've got what he calls Acts, which he means by that is Acts 9, where Luke is the historian. He tells the account. So it's Luke recounting what he's been told by Paul. And then we presume, because he doesn't give multiple sources for what he's saying. And then we have what Bentham calls the first Paul account, and then we have the second Paul account. That's how he calls it. And then we know that the first Paul account is in Acts 22. That's where the crowd is, charged up about Trophimus defiling the temple. And then there's the second account where Acts 26 is he's been in prison for a couple of years over that whole thing with Trophimus, and now he won't tell anybody why he's on trial. He's in prison with Festus, and he won't tell him why why he's even in jail. Festus is saying, "What did you do wrong?" And so he will never tell him, give him a straight answer of what he's doing there. So Festus asks King Agrippa, "Can you help him find out why this guy is even here? I can't figure it out." So that's just one of the more humorous things that Paul was playing duck, where you just duck from fire and hopefully the bullet goes over your head. Um, so so that's what what the three accounts are he's going to compare, and he calls the Acts 9 account the standard account. Then he calls the first account where Paul is in that crisis where everyone's yelling and screaming and it's chaos. He calls that the speech given without preparation. And then the final column is the studied account. So this is the account where you would assume you would put your thinking cap on and remember the facts as truthfully and as carefully as you can without exaggeration, but also not forgetting anything that's a detail that's important. Okay, so but the you have to also bear in mind the standard account should also have a similar studied nature, similar similarity to the studied account, because this is one where you're sitting around a campfire with Luke and you're telling him what happened, and he can come back at you multiple times and get questions answered from you and find out more details about the event, because it's a momentous event. I mean, this is like a tremendous event. Okay. So he would have been obviously curious. And so but that would all be done with slow reflection over a long period of time. Same with the studied account. He's got years sitting in prison waiting to talk to people about his whole experience. So then you have the speech without preparation is one that would be it would just be in a different category than those two accounts. So let's see what he says in this analysis. He says, well, first of all, he's just talking about the light in the sky. He saw a light. That's in the Acts 9 account where Luke is recording. And it's in the first account, the one where he didn't have much time for preparation, and it's light. But when it gets to the third account in front of King Agrippa, where it's the most serious and everything's under oath, it's an adjudicatory proceeding. He says there was a light brighter than the sun in the sky. Okay, so now how does Bentham look at that? So he says this seemed to imply a miracle, but he says there was no demand or need for it at midday. I mean, midday is when the sun is highest in the sky. It's not like it's dark out and you need some sunshine. So why he's questioning, like, why would God do this? And then he adds a second argument or issue is bereaving, which is a word in Old English meaning denying, of the ability to every eye that should direct itself towards it. So you would have this bright light, so bright that you wouldn't even want to look at it. You could blind yourself looking at it. So why would God do a miracle that would actually blind you in the process so you couldn't see whatever if Paul was supposed to be a witness to the resurrection, you wouldn't want to blind him, right? You want him to see the resurrected Christ fully and clearly. But doing it this way, how can he see him? There's just too much light. So that's just he's just throwing out stuff to consider, like why is this happening this way? And then he says, see, it was not needful, especially created body. So it appears to be like there's a special object in the sky that is so bright. Now he doesn't even tell you Jesus is in this bright light. He just says he saw a bright light. Presumably Jesus is in the light, but he doesn't ever say that. But why would Jesus have to appear that way unless that's his new nature? He's just so surrounded by glory. It's not a glory that would just simply be like Moses' glory that was glowing and was very distinctive, but nobody got blinded looking at him. So like it's just why was it this way? So uh, he says, well, if God had to do this miracle because it was, we needed more light from the sky, all God had to do was remove a single cloud, and that would have given ample light to have this meeting on the road outside Damascus. But here's what he actually says. It's something you might not think about. If this light really was created specially for the occasion, for the purpose, and brighter than that of the sun, it was an important circumstance. And the mention of it should not have been omitted in the standard narrative, meaning in Luke's summary, in this first summary, why wouldn't he mention something that's miraculous? A miracle happened at the scene. It wasn't just Jesus appearing, which is miraculous in and of itself, but there was a phenomenon of nature that everybody could see, maybe even far, far away, all the people with him, and it was a company of people. So we would then have some idea of the scope of this event. So the suggestion, though, is that well, you can figure it out. Why would Luke not include something like this in the first account, and why would he include it in the last account? So he answers and he says, this is what he thinks. In the Acts 26 account, a redundancy, the cause of which seems sufficiently obvious. So, and I kind of had to look up Old English to understand how they're using the word redundancy. So, what did I come up with? Well, I'll just do it from memory. Basically, if you say something that's not necessarily necessary to describe something, and you've added another fact that was not necessary, it makes us wonder why you put that unnecessary fact in, and we can question whether you were trying to exaggerate something unnecessarily and it wasn't really appropriate for the scene or the setting. It is incongruous that God would create a bright light to make the scene, illumined, when Jesus's own glory would probably be fine. But I mean, a light brighter than the sun is really intense, make it hard to see Jesus because it's so bright and will blind you. In fact, Paul becomes blinded from this light, apparently. All right, so he's going to say this. In the Acts 26 account, a redundancy, the cause of which seems sufficiently obvious, a redundancy in that account which, being premeditated on the part of the historian Luke, is given to by him as being premeditated on the part of the speaker, meaning Paul. This is the third version. This is Paul speaking. He says, whom he represents is delivering it. A redundancy, meaning something unnecessary to be said, and basically going beyond what the facts required or were needful, right? And that, in a word, it was a falsehood. A falsehood, and for what purpose? For deception. The hero represented by his historian Luke as using endeavors to deceive. So to him, that he thinks this is decisive proof that here's a fact that Luke should have mentioned this in his first account if he if it really happened, if he thought it happened. But he's being faithful to Paul and will repeat whatever Paul says later. So why did Luke? So you have to presume Paul did not tell Luke this fact. So the real point is this: he never told this to Luke. Luke hears this for the first time in the Agrippa testimony. And the question is, why wouldn't you not have told this, Luke, when you're in the same situation where you're not pressured, it's not stressful, you're having a one-on-one with a friendly person like Luke, and you didn't tell him there was a miracle that took place in the sky that people could see from. I mean, to me, that would be the most decisive fact about the whole thing. It was just a miracle. So, so he's saying the answer is pretty clear. The editor to the book wrote, Bentham makes a point overlooked by all commentators that if Paul's claim that the light was brighter than the sun, found in Acts 26, Paul's second personal account, then naturally such a miracle should have been spoken about in the first and second accounts in Acts. Hence, Bentham says Paul's version, Acts 26, was indubitably false and intended to deceive, a deception by the speaker, Paul, not by the author of Acts. Okay, so I think that's where I'm going to leave it right now, but you get the idea. And then we're going to go through, I'm going to show you how he breaks down other things, what he calls the dialogue. You have, all these things Jesus says, or excuse me, dialogue back and forth between Paul and his Jesus. And then you see, what happens is you get lengthy changes in the third account. So you get the third account seems to be the one that obviously the point of Bentham is that they're exaggerated. We've already seen exaggeration about the light brighter than the sun, and wait till you see what happens with Jesus's words. They go from zero in virtually zero in Acts 9 and 22, and they become like a volume, a book, like 6 or 7 lines in place of in these 9 and 22 accounts. Jesus says, you'll find out what you're going to do in Damascus, and that's it. That he just says, hello, I'm Jesus, why are you persecuting me? And then Paul says, what am I to do? And Jesus says, you're going to go into town and you'll find out. Boom. That's it. Short and sweet. But in Acts 26, it's this long, Jesus spends all this time telling them a list of things. You're going to do this. You're going to go be Gentiles, going to go to the Gentiles. You're going to go to this place, that place. So it's like, where did this come from? So he's going to raise the question. It's the same thing I just told you he's going to say on the issue of the light brighter than the sun in this third account. So the third account is going to be established, I think, more and more as we go forward, even though it's under oath, as the more exaggerated and false account. Okay, everyone. So thanks for visiting. I hope this was helpful and take care. God bless. Ciao.